Recorded live from the mats of Radical MMA in New York City. The Martial Culture Podcast. Your source for in-depth combat sports and martial arts insights with Coach Renee Dreyfus and Matt Peters. Ring the bell and let's get it on.
Welcome back to another episode of Martial Culture Podcast. Get your pen, get your notebook. You're going to want to take notes during this episode because we have a great one. Renee?
Absolutely.
Set the stage for us. I want to get right to it.
This is a true one of the Dirty Dozen, one of the first non-Brazilian black belts, and also, besides Jiu-Jitsu, a martial arts pioneer from many different martial arts, a man with tremendous insight who I follow all the time and have been honored to have spoken, have some interaction with, Professor John Will out of Australia. Welcome, John.
Hey, thanks very much. Thanks for having us, Renee. Thank you, Matt.
Oh, thank you for making the time. And for those guys who don't know, John, you and one of the reasons I respect you so much is I started out in traditional martial arts, and I know you got your start in traditional martial arts, and then segued to a lot of different things. And one martial art wasn't enough, and you were cross-training before anybody was cross-training. But can you go through your martial art background? I know you had that wonderful trip to India, which we discussed when we were chatting, had all those wonderful knife collection and weapon collection. And also, I don't know much about it, but I'd be fascinated to hear about your Silla training in Indonesia as well. But anyway, please tell me about yourself. Tell the listeners about your background and anything else you'd like to add about yourself and your martial journey.
All right, I'll try and keep it short because there's
a lot. Yeah.
But when I was at school, I wasn't ever academically oriented. I mean, I became academically oriented, when I was in my 30s, I guess, but not when I was at school, right? So when I finished my school, I was doing martial arts while I was in school. Did freestyle wrestling, taekwondo, goju karate, stuff like that. But when I finished my schooling at the age of 17, I'd read some books by a chap you probably know, Don Draeger.
Yes.
Who was a pioneer, one of my early heroes as a martial arts heroes as a kid. He was a U.S. Marine in the Marines, and he traveled and rode extensively. He traveled all through Asia, training. He was quite an interesting character. And I had some books by him, and I just thought when I left school, I'll just follow in his footsteps. I'll just do that. Sounds like a plan. So I went over to Indonesia, and with the intention of training all through Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, China, Japan, India, and so forth, following in Draeger's footsteps. And then I just got stuck in Indonesia for about 8 years, so it slowed me down a little bit.
What made you travel to? What was the first country you traveled to? Was it Indonesia first, or was it India first?
Yes, Indonesia, because that's very close to Australia. It's only an hour away. From the top part of Australia, it's only an hour away. That's our Canada.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. You train in the martial art of Silat, where there's that. Is that correct?
That's right. Silat is like a generic term. It'd be like saying Budo.
Oh, okay.
So when you say Silat, it covers a vast range, like hundreds of different styles. Some that are just weaponry, some pure grappling, some striking, some a mixture, some MMA-ish. So it's vast. So that's a very generic term. And I trained in 4 or 5 of the main Silat styles throughout all of Indonesia, and I did that from about 1975 to 1982.
Wow, that's fascinating. My experience with Silat is interesting because the very first time I ever saw an Amor Plata was about 1979, 1980, and it was from a Silat practitioner doing Amor Plata, and that was not. That's
weird.
What, it's interesting to see it. Like, oh wow, this is something that we associate with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now. Yes. Of course, it's in other martial arts, but my very first experience was in Silat. So it's a fascinating. You're right. It has some grappling, and were you more drawn to the striking arts or to the grappling arts? You had that wrestling background. Is that?
I was drawn to the, like the fantasy of it all. Like getting superpowers. I wanted superpowers.
I've heard Silat has a strong mystical element.
It's got so much bullshit. It is 90% bullshit.
Really?
Oh yes, because it's tied in with, no disrespect, but it's tied into very strongly, especially in Java, it's tied into Islam. So Islam is a mystical religion. There's a lot of mysticism interwoven in that, particularly in Southeast Asia. Their brand of Islam is very mystical, schmystical. So there's a lot of stuff there that's just complete crap bullshit. But but that's not what I mean. What I wanted to get into was just the fantasy of being able to Jackie Chan my way out of problems, with striking, kicking movement and all that stuff. And it was great, and it was a really good grounding. But what I ultimately got out of it was the idea of cross-training. That was what I ultimately got out of it, the concept of we need to strike and grapple and clinch and take down, and we need to fight on the floor, and we need to learn how to fight against weapons, with weapons, and multiple. That's what I got an overview.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because, when I was a kid and I started in karate, I had a very unique teacher, Miyazaki Totaro Sensei, who was like, cross-training is it. He's like, Renee, if you really want to learn how to punch, train with a boxer. I'm like, what? I want to do karate. I want to be a ninja. I want to be a samurai. I don't want to do Western stuff. And he told me this. He's like, boxers have the best way of teaching and moving their hips. And he's like, you really need to learn how to grapple too. And of course, I was too young and I didn't listen to him until, I was like 12, 13. But it's interesting that back then, I think we were all closed-minded because we wanted to be closed-minded. I don't even know. But also the generation itself, most people were not thinking like you, except for Bruce Lee and a few other standouts like Azuma, sensei in Japan, who was expelled from Kyokushin because he did the biggest sin of combining judo and karate and boxing, because that was such a sinful, horrible thing. How could you disgrace everything? But anyway, so I just amazing that you were such a forward thinker. And after Indonesia, was that after when you took the trip to India as well, or?
Yes, after Indonesia, actually what happened was I started in a magazine called Blitz, which was the Australian martial arts magazine.
I know it. It was the number one magazine. I saw it. I Googled it. That's why I know it. I don't really know it, but I saw it was like the number one magazine for years.
Yes, I started that in my I'll give you the short story. It was very funny. There was a magazine called Australian Fighting Arts, and I wrote an article in that magazine about cross training, and some friends of the editor wrote back a scathing retort saying, something, what would you know? You're a kid. What would you know about anything? You can't mix your martial arts, says those guys who are now teaching mixed martial arts. So there's some irony for you. But you can't mix your martial arts. And they said all this. I wrote back a reply to that, which the editor refused to publish. Really? So I overreacted, as was my nature at that time of my life. I overreacted by going down to a publishing house, asking how much it cost to publish a magazine, because if they're not going to let me reply in their magazine, I'm going to make my own and put them out of business.
I love that.
So I went down there. I found out that it's going to cost me $10,000, which is a lot of money. But I thought if I sold $10,000 worth of ads, I'll break even, and then I'll get my message out. So I ran around, got the ads, made the magazine. It had actually made a profit of like $4,000 or $5,000, and I thought, wow, I'll do it 4 times a year, one each season, summer, autumn, spring, and so I did that, and that's how I started Blitz magazine. And it took me 10 issues to put the other one out of business. So then
and you put them out of business. You really did. Oh my God!
Yeah, I killed them.
Did you send them a signed copy of the first edition? Send them a signed copy of the first edition.
Note to self: never get John Will mad.
I wasn't that gracious, Matt. I was a mutt.
Wow, you'll go a long way to get.
Once that was mission accomplished, I got rid of the magazine. I sold it. So, but it was in that period of 2.5 years of owning that magazine, the first 10 issues. That's when I traveled to India and Brazil, and all over the world, because that magazine gave me enough money to, just eke a living, right? It was like pocket money, I suppose. Right. So that allowed me, and I was traveling with an excuse. I wanted to go to India, and so I'd get 6 or 8 articles on Kalari Payat down south, or Vajra Mashti in the middle, or wrestling in the north. And then Brazil was part of that whole thing. And that's how I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and went to India. So that magazine explained a lot of things.
Wow, I did not know that. That's an amazing story and so incredibly cool. And but it's
shallow.
So can I ask you a question? I'm familiar with Kushti wrestling in India, but I'm not familiar with the other styles, the Vajra Mashti. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes. Vajra Mashti is a style that is now dead, completely dead. I happen to train with the last 2 living. This sounds like a very weird thing that you'd normally say about ninjutsu or something, but I train with the last 2 living guys that practice that art. The family was called the Jesse Mullers. Jesse Muller, I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly, so forgive me, any people from India. The Jesse Mullers literally means, Muller means fighter, Jesse means he who cannot be beaten. So there's a family name.
Wow, that's yeah.
And they were you could liken that to the Gracie family in Brazil. So their family, going back for 1,200 years, were practitioners of this art called Vajra Mashti, which was basically MMA. So you can imagine striking and grappling with a lot of groundwork, just like MMA, except that they had a knuckle duster on the right hand.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so hardcore. And so the men were all trained in that family in that art, and the women were trained in healing, bone setting, and all of that.
Wow.
So, and that goes back over 1,000 years.
Can I ask you a question? What of that art, or say the Silla arts, do you find that you still use today in your training? Like you bring it in, like, hey, I learned this and this is useful. Like for me, I've studied not like you. I don't want to put myself on the same pedestal as you, but I started in karate. I went into Japanese jiu-jitsu. And I studied a number of different styles of Japanese jiu-jitsu. And, a lot of the Japanese jiu-jitsu I don't use anymore. I'm like, there's just better stuff to do. But there's a couple moves here and there. I'm like, we're going to keep. This is really good, and let's do this. I'm curious how much of those arts, because especially if it was an MMA art, even weapon MMA, or, that you found, are there still some moves you're like, oh, this is something we want to preserve? Or have you just completely abandoned it and gone over to the more, contemporary styles?
I think I have. Because at that time that I hadn't done any BJJ. So BJJ supplanted that idea,
Right.
Not to say that art didn't have any good stuff, but I was just a novice, so I probably wasn't able to appreciate it.
Right.
At
especially,
that time, so I'm just,
there's only 2 people left. There's, part of training is training with the, I think one of the reasons why jiu-jitsu is so successful over other styles of Brazilian jiu-jitsu is so successful over other styles of jiu-jitsu. And I don't know if you know, but in New York, there are 2 styles of jiu-jitsu that were created in New York based on obviously the Japanese tradition, but they were modernized. Moses Powell jiu-jitsu, but they're not successful. And I think one is this is a limited population. The Gracies procreated and taught and created a community of people that was very, very large. So you go into dojo and there's not 2 people, there's 400, and that's a big deal. The critical mass of people all working in the same thing. I always think a style is not just the techniques, but the technology and the environment that style uses. And the Gracies created an environment in which to thrive,
And I don't think it's any coincidence that some of the people who are really good, like the Mendez brothers, there's 2 of them, the Miao brothers, there's 2 of them, the Gracies, there were always 2 or 4 or 10 of them. I mean, that's even just within a little family.
Right.
So they always had someone to,
work with,
practice their stuff on and work stuff out. Whereas a lot of Westerners, they haven't got their brother doing it. It's just we're more solo, more individual. So I think that really helped. That contributed a lot to the development of the art.
Wonderful point. Fantastic point.
But the Vajra Mashti guys, it was interesting. That's where I first saw Amor Plata, Rene.
Oh.
Yeah, I saw Amor Plata there. which was, I didn't appreciate it at the time because I hadn't done BJJ. So I just went, what the hell? You know, from the bottom, the guy's locking him up with his arm, with his legs, and then he's punching him in the back of the head with his knuckle duster. That's weird, you know, so it was just like that. But anyway, it's further proof that, you know, like who invented toast, right?
Great. Now I got to Google that.
Who invented toast? I don't know, but you know, it's very interesting because it's going back to Silla. I just saw a funeral stele that two actually. One was a person choking another person out with a rear naked choke and doing a body triangle on him, and also I traveled to England and Paris recently, and when we went to the British Museum, we were looking at all the ancient Greek sculptures, and a few of them, guess what I saw? You're gonna laugh when I say it.
Inside heel hook.
50-50. Yeah, 50-50 to like a leg entanglement, and then the guy's entangling the legs, and then one guy's trying to stab the other, and the other one's looking like a leg lock kind of thing, right? Awesome. But it's like, whoa! And I saw it like 3 times, and knee on the belly everywhere. I mean, I stopped looking. I'm like, okay, this is the 40th knee on the belly I've seen. So it's like, you know, it's like it's fascinating. But then again, you also look at something like the triangle choke, which in my research, which is, I have to say, it's somewhat broad because I did a lot of research in Japan in Japanese language, which I speak. I also speak historical Japanese, or I read it. I wouldn't say I speak it. And I've done research. It's like you don't see the triangle choke. The triangle choke in any martial art prior to the turn of the century, and Oda Tsunetane was the guy who really did it. And you don't see it in ancient Greece. You don't see it in traditional art. So it's interesting how, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's like I'm not saying it didn't exist, but there's no recorded evidence of it ever anywhere, even in the Japanese, traditions. And the ones that say they have it are lying. They're lying.
That's
because I can look at the Mokuroku, the scrolls and all that, and they're like, it's nowhere to be seen. And I've gone to these historical libraries and looked at firsthand sources like, nope, there's nothing there. The guy who first did it, who first recorded it, was Oda Tsunetane. And E.J. Harrison was a fighter who was the first one to start publishing books on his, this method of ground fighting. He's one of the original Kosen guys, but there's, I agree in principle with that. There's nothing new under the sun, but sometimes there really is. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that is kind of weird to me because when you told me that, when you said that, because to me, for example, Amor Plata, I think the way Amor Plata was probably invented was it's a triangle on the arm, right?
Yeah.
So Amor Plata's been around a long time. So that,
absolutely, and body triangle has been around forever. But nobody ever did it.
It's weird that triangle, Sankaku hasn't been. Well, there's no evidence of.
There's no evidence.
I saw last year or the year before, I forget. I was in the museum near the Acropolis in Greece, and there's a carving, like a stone relief on the wall of a centaur doing an inside heel hook on a human.
Did you post that on Facebook? I think I saw you post it, right?
I did. Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah, I saved it. I actually saved it. I saved the picture.
Inside heel hook,
yeah.
Like the saddle.
Fascinating, right? And anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off on what you were saying before. I apologize.
I forget what we're talking about.
No, we just that you went to India and we were talking Vajra Mashti with
Vajra Mashti. Yeah. I actually got the book. I've got a book. There's only 100 copies ever made, and it's called the Mala Purana. And there's a book on Vajra Mashti, and there's only 100 ever done.
Wow.
Yeah, I got one.
That's amazing.
In my library.
I'm a bit of a collector of historical documentation for martial arts, mostly in the Japanese tradition, because I speak Japanese and I can read Japanase, and I can enter that a little bit more easily. So I love looking at these, historical Japanese books and texts when I can get a hold of them. But if I could ever see a PDF of that, I would love to see that as well.
Well, 2/3 of it or 3/4 of it is in Sanskrit, so there's a problem.
Okay.
And Google doesn't translate Sanskrit.
I have an Indian friend who trains with us. I'll put him to work. I'll give free private.
He could give it a crack.
Yeah.
But what I was lucky because that book was published, I forget, somewhere in the 60s, when England made some rule about books being published at universities during that period, they had to have something like a quarter English preface.
Oh.
So a quarter of the book's written in English.
Oh,
it's cool. That was like an English, I guess, one of the benefits of colonialization. So
benefits for us.
Yeah.
Benefits for us. Yeah, benefits for us. It's pretty cool. So it's a good book. But anyway, yeah. So that was a good part. It was interesting meeting those two guys.
When did you first have your experience with the Brazilian tradition of martial arts?
Well, I went to America in the I forget, it was like 86. And I was doing some training with Gene LaBelle, Benny the Jet Center, LA, right?
Yeah. The Jet Center was really big back then too.
The Jet Center was the place to go.
Yeah.
So I went there, and there was a lot of great martial artists training there. Petey Cunningham, Howard Jackson, some really well-known, wonderful American martial artists, let alone Benny the Jet. Chuck Norris was even hanging around there. Lots of people would go there. It was a bit of a mecca. And when I was over there, I'd heard about some Brazilians teaching in Torrance, which of course was Horry and Gracie teaching his garage. So I called him up and I said, "Can I do a private lesson?" He said, "Sure, come down." I said, "Do you want this was in Australia before I even went. Right? I said, "I'm going to come to America. Can I do some training with you?" He goes, "Sure, it's private lessons, $100 an hour." And I went, $100? I nearly fell over dead. Like, you got to be joking, $100 an hour in 1985. I had to sell my house. But anyway, and then you want to hear the funnier part of the story? I said, "Look, can I bring you anything from Australia?" Thinking, do you want a boomerang or a pet koala bear for your kid? And he says, just bring a kimono. Right. You can see where this is going.
Right.
Just what I bought him.
What'd you buy him?
A kimono.
Okay. Oh, you mean he meant a gi, and you thought he meant a Japanese kimono.
Yes. Because no one called gis kimonos back then.
Right. Yeah, that's a funny thing that tripped me up in the beginning too, because of course I'm from Japan, and actually in Japan they don't really call them gis either. They call them dogi, like judo gi.
Right.
Yeah, and so although of course I did karate as a kid, so I know what a gi is, but I never heard it referred to as a kimono. Kimono actually doesn't mean kimono like the formal kimono. It generally means just like things you wear. Yeah, just stuff you wear, right? Although obviously you're talking about formal kimono, like it can mean that too. But it tripped me up when when they said kimono, and I'm like, what? I see what you mean.
So I've gone down the street,
Yeah.
hunted around in Melbourne, found a Japanese clothes store, bought a secondhand kimono, because who sells new kimonos? And I took that to America and rock up at his garage and go, "Here's the thing you wanted from Australia. It seems weird to me, but here it is." He goes, "Where's your kimono?" I go, "Here it is." He goes, "No, I mean a gi." I went, "Uh-oh."
Oh, man.
So that was I bought 5 lessons off him Monday to Friday. On the 5th lesson,
So for $500.
he says, "I can't teach you today. I'm going to take my kids to Disneyland. But my cousin is up from Brazil. He's helping me teach my private lessons. He'll teach you." So I rock out there on my 5th lesson on a Friday, and that cousin was Higan Machado, who was out there working for $5 an hour in his garage, getting 5% of the fee, doing like 50 lessons a week. So that's how I met Higan. And he taught me the best lesson of the 5 lessons that I had. Higan was into it because he was passionate about it. And even though he couldn't speak one word of English, his passion was oozing out of him, trying to, get the ideas across to me. So we instantly hit it off. And then when I went home after that to Australia, came back 6 months later with the intention of doing one more lesson there so I could just ask them, "Where do I go in Brazil?" So I turned up to do that lesson. And it was Higan again. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Don't train here. You need to go to Brazil." And I said, "That's what I wanted to ask." And he says, "I'm going Wednesday. Come with me." So we became kind of good friends and have been hanging out ever since. That's Higan Machado I'm talking about.
some of the most mind-blowing like moments in my career, which is again nothing like yours, but was Hegan saying, "Renee, why don't you think about it like this?" I'm like, "Oh my God, that just what?" Like it just changed everything. And literally just offhanded things, because he's such a master instructor. He'll say exactly what you need to just get your mind in the right place. And he's an amazing guy. He's really amazing. I was my first experience with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was not with him, although my first real experience with him, I met Sal Ribeiro in Japan and rolled with him for a little bit, but that really wasn't like a teaching experience. My first walking into a jiu-jitsu gym was the RCJ Machado Academy and on Hawthorne, and it was just it was like I'm sold, and he was so welcoming too. And that's what I liked about the Machados for me personally, was that, I came from a judo background and I thought, oh my God, these guys are going to just destroy me. Because it was back then with the rivalries and this. And the reason I liked the Machados is because, I saw when they went to Japan, his brother, Jean-Jacques had a super fight with Yuki Nakai in Jiu-Jitsu super fight, right? And they were like so respectful. And they're like, oh, all martial arts are good. And, we love Dennis Santo, we're training with him. I'm like, maybe these guys aren't going to just rape me. Now they did, with the smile on their face and never hurt me and showed me. And they're like, oh, you're good, but you need this and this and this. And it was just such a positive experience. And, I think the Gracie family has kind of changed, especially the younger generation. They're like, okay, instead of like beating the snot out of people like the Gracie Challenge, why don't we just have a more softer approach? And it goes back to, you get more flies with sugar than vinegar, And so it's interesting. But I treasure my time with the Machado, with Higa Machado, it was fantastic. So, and you were living in Brazil. And how long were you there?
I only went a couple of times for a month or two at a time, or a couple of months, but because it wasn't very long after that where the Machados started coming to America. Right, so they all somewhere between, I'm going to say 1986 and 1990, they all moved up to LA. And because I connected to them, I didn't have to go to Brazil anymore. I then started going to LA. And that all happened in that period. Hegan's out here next week, and weirdly enough, I'm taking him to India.
I actually knew that because I saw you post that, but I think that's that's amazing. And so for the guys who don't know, that you were one of the Dirty Dozen, which is the first 12 non-Brazilians to get their black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that must seem, I mean, you're such a humble guy, but it must be kind of cool to know that you have that pioneering influence.
I think that of course, at the time, if you think about it, at the time, you don't know you're doing these things, right? Like, you don't know. You're just doing your thing, and you don't think that anyone's going to be jumping in. Like, normal people aren't going to do this. That's insane. So I had no idea that it was going to become popular.
Especially back in the day. I mean, jiu-jitsu was like, second cousin to NHB. And it was like when I told people that I was interested in NHB, and they were like, it was like saying you do porn, it was like a terrible thing. Like, my mom's like ashamed of me, Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, I totally, I never thought ever in a million years Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would be as popular as it is now.
No, I mean, it's because it came to America. Chuck Norris helped the Machados get there. That they kicked it off there along with Horry, and then of course the UFC was the big thing and put it in the public view. But even when the UFC came out in 1992, there were still only one or two academies, and it took several years after the UFC before mainstream people started walking into the mats. And then when they walked into the mats, then the word started to spread. So it was probably to mid-90s where it started to become popular, and then maybe because this was no coincidence that it was at the same time where the internet came out, the emergence of the internet.
Absolutely, I totally believe that Jiu-Jitsu is the first kind of cybernetic. Jiu-Jitsu and MMA are the first cybernetic martial arts in that they were assisted considerably by technology and the and
the timing.
The timing, yeah, absolutely. But I'd say even I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu seriously in 2000. And, there was basically there were two jiu-jitsu schools in all of New York City. You know, like there was the Machado Association and there was Henzo's, and that was it. That was all there was. Now there's probably like 500. You know, it's like I don't even know how many. I mean, it's just unbelievable how many there are, and it's just so completely different.
It's great seeing people like Renzo, because I mean, when I was on the mat in Brazil, Renzo was a purple belt.
No,
and,
oh my God.
You know, it's funny seeing these guys now, because they were all when at that time, way back in 1987 or something, they were all in the same room. Well, I can't say all, but you know, in the same room you had 5 Machado brothers, Hillion Gracie, Renzo Gracie, Hyan Gracie, Half Gracie. They're just the normal kid. They were just guys in the class.
Yeah. I mean, it was before the family really split irrevocably.
Yeah, and I don't think split's the great word. I think the right way to say it is they just grew up and they all just went away and they all started doing their own things.
That's probably true. You know, yeah, like any family, like you lose touch with of course.
And it was exactly just like any family. You know, the kids grow up and then they leave their homes and then they've all got their own places, but they still get together and see each other at Christmas. I think that's what it was like. You know, and they went to different places. Or at the beginning, when the Machados come to America, they all lived in the one house and had the one school. But then after that, they got on their feet. Then, of course, they split off, you know, and have another one got his own house and then his own school. And then, you know, kind of like that. And I think that's what's happened everywhere. I mean, Renzo went to New York and Hyan went to, Half went to San Francisco, you know, stuff like that. And it kind of spread. Hillion appeared much later on, way down south somewhere in Florida.
He's in Florida. Yeah, Florida, right?
So yeah, you know, it's kind of, and there, I mean, I only know a small portion. There's, of course, many other Brazilians that are really great that have come to America and spread everywhere. But now it's not just that. It's now Americans, you know, themselves have, Westerners or non-Brazilians are contributing just as much as any Brazilian has ever contributed to the development and spreading of the art. So it's not, you know.
I know you're friends with Gilbert Melendez, and, you know, a person he trains with is Jake Shields. And Jake Shields said something interesting. He's like, I do American jiu-jitsu, but really there's no jiu-jitsu. There's just jiu-jitsu. And Sanjay Ibarra said the same thing. He's like, maybe we should stop calling it Brazilian jiu-jitsu and just call it jiu-jitsu. And I know what they're trying to say, and I believe that's a cool thing. But the other time, I also know as a practitioner of Japanese other styles of jiu-jitsu that it's very important to make a difference, because obviously a distinction is important in training. And I also know that there are some people in the Japanese or traditional jiu-jitsu world who are disreputable, who took the Japanese part away when Brazilian jiu-jitsu started getting popular. And they say, I do jiu-jitsu, but no, you don't do this. It's not the same. You know, it's sort of like, and I'm in the judo world too, of course, because I trained judo for a long time. And there are a lot of judo people who say, well, you know, jiu-jitsu is just judo. Well, that's not really true. But it's like also saying like boxing. Okay. You know, boxing is a big world, but there's also Philly style. There's, you know, Kronk gym style, you know, there's rope, you know, there's different sub styles in boxing. There is. And that's a fact. And they're not all the same. And, you know, and they all have their systems, their, you know, the rope-a-dope, this, whatever you want to call it, right? But to say that, you know, Muhammad Ali boxed exactly the same way as Mike Tyson is silly. They're just completely different. You know, okay, it's the same world. Of course, the training method's the same, but I think with jiu-jitsu, it's even larger. The way Japanese jiu-jitsu people train is in Japan, and I know I trained with them, is very different and, you know, archaic and antiquated and not efficient, honestly, for the most part, compared to the way Brazilian jiu-jitsu or Gracie jiu-jitsu, you know, or whatever, you know, lineage of that you want to say is trains. And there's a difference. You know, so names make a difference. But that being said, we're all part of this larger community who contributes to the evolution of fighting arts. And for me personally, I want to get your take on this, but I actually am a little disappointed with the jiu-jitsu world today. So for me personally, I like identifying with the MMA world because it seems to me a little bit more scientific in that it's results, completely 100% results oriented. And it also is style blind, because I really don't want to be a jiu-jitsu guy. I don't want to be a judo guy. I don't want to be a Silla guy or this guy. I want to be the best unarmed combatant that I can be.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
you've been in the world a long time, and I'm very critical of what I see. I don't know how it is in Brazil, but it's like belt inflation now is unbelievable. So people are selling kind of belts, and the skill is going down, and people come on the mat and they don't train like they used to. I don't sound like I'm the old guy back in the day, but it just doesn't have the same fighting relevance that it used to. And when two people dive into 50-50 and stay there for 5 minutes, and one guy scores an advantage, and then they're like, oh, and run around like they won, the world. I'm like, that's not why I started this art, But so I'm personally distancing myself from the jiu-jitsu world. First of all, because I've studied many martial arts, and I think all of them have something to offer. But second, the direction where that modern jiu-jitsu is taking is not the direction I want to go. It reminds me of the trajectory of Taekwondo here, where when I was younger, and my uncle came back from a service in Asia, and he had studied Taekwondo in Korea for a long time. And they didn't even call it Taekwondo back then. He studied Muda Kwan, but they were bare knuckle throwing down. And of course, the technology is not as high as martial arts today, but they were really, really, really fighting. Yeah. And then you look at Taekwondo today, and it's like 6-year-old black belts. It's just a trajectory that really disheartens me. And I see the commercialization here in America. I can't speak for Australia, but here in America, it's crazy how low the standards have dropped. And, I remember when a blue belt was a stone cold killer. And now 99% of the blue belts probably would have a tough time in a street fight. They probably would. And that's not how it was back in the day. I mean, for at least my experience, and that's when I started in 2000, I mean, I can't even imagine what it was like with you, if you're in the room and Henzo's a purple belt, I'm sure it was pretty tough.
Yeah. I've got a lot to say about that.
I will be quiet completely and listen to you because,
I'm taking his mic away.
Yes, I'll turn it away.
Get him, Matt. I think that I used to, when I started out, I was probably very similar. My way in, my segue in to BJJ was probably very similar to you, in that I was a martial artist looking to be more effective in fights, and there was a hole in my development, meaning groundwork. And weirdly enough, a lot of fights that I got into, I won on the ground with a little freestyle wrestling. I'd kick and punch, and if it wasn't going well, double leg takedown, mount, punch. And because I won a significant amount of fights like that, that attracted me to BJJ. And then I realized how bad I was at groundwork. Yet I was still effective, really effective, even with how bad I was. So that attracted me to want to learn more BJJ. And then but I was still always, right up until when I got my black belt in BJJ, I had to run everything that I learned through the, will this work in a fight filter? And if the answer was, no, this is not really great for a fight, then I wouldn't pay much attention to it. And if it was really good in a fight, I, knee ride and stuff, I go, this is awesome. I'll do it. Right.
That's exactly me.
Okay. Now, but having said that, I've changed my view over the last 10 years. So because if you go down that road, this is my view, right? If you go down that road where everything has to be about functionality and working in a fight, then it raises some interesting questions. I do that for, let's say, that's fine for 2 years. That's fine for 5 years. If I'm practicing for 30 years, 40 years, my whole life, and everything has to be run through the does it work in a fight filter, but I'm not getting into fights. I'm not out there getting into fights to need all that training. And it could be argued that I've had many more injuries on the mat than I would have ever had in a normal street fight. Mm. So I've got to find some better reason to train than just self-defense. I do not train for self-defense anymore. I'm not interested in I won't say I'm not interested in self-defense. I have to be interested to the point where I provide the people that are coming to me with that in mind. I have to be able to, I have a duty of care to provide them with what they're asking for. So I say this, self-defense will get you there it will not keep you there. No one, I'm not going to say no one, but very few people are still training for pure self-defense 40 years down the track. So I think the efficacy of BJJ as in terms of fighting will get you there. It'll get you started. But what keeps you there 20 years later is the complexity. And the never-ending evolution of the complexity of the art is not driven by self-defense. It's driven by, my counter to your counter to my counter to your counter to making me come up with a new counter. So that's got nothing to do with self-defense. Yeah. So I'm up for this. I'm a little bit more of the view now. Whatever keeps you on the mat is good. And if that's berimbolo, then fine. And if it's rat guard, then fine. It's whatever keeps you on the mat. And not so much 20 years ago, I would have answered this question differently. No, it's got to be effective in fighting. So you see how I've changed in my view. I
100% respect everything you said. And you are someone I look up to and a true master. I will say that I do see it differently because I agree with that because, I see that in MMA because, you're right. I mean, self-defense is kind of a small portion of what I do, but I do is mixed martial art effectiveness. But what I see is, you said duty of care. And what I see is a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners unable to differentiate what works in a fight and what doesn't. And that troubles me.
Rene, I'm talking about me. Right. I'm not talking about other people.
Right. Oh, no, and no judgment. Absolutely. I mean.
Right. Yeah. Right. If you had to frame the question, what do I think of other people, teaching some worm guard 6 months into a beginner, I'd go, what are you doing?
Yes.
I mean, right. So
exactly.
That's a different question.
Yeah. And I like the complexity, the interaction of MMA, because for me, and I totally agree with what you're saying, because, after a while, headlock defense gets kind of boring, but if you are like, I like to train in always a combat jiu-jitsu modality. So whenever we roll, we're always integrating slaps. So it's still, there's the problem solving, which is what I love about it, but it integrates a lot of the concepts of Bruce Lee where it's like, let's get rid of the walls between the styles. And okay, we start striking, we go to takedowns, we go to ground, and we go back up and we transition all the way through, and you're counter, I counter you. And that is what fascinates me, and how we can do that more efficiently. For me, my quest is how we can make everything much more efficient and effective for the least athletic individual to be functional. And I'm constantly trying to refine what I do to take someone who's very small or very uncoordinated and make them, safe, and also maybe, who knows, maybe go into the cage someday, That's for me. And again, everybody has to find their way,
Well, everyone does. And people come into martial arts, BJJ or any other martial arts, from 100 different points of view, right? Some of them are coming just for socialization. Some of them are coming to learn self-defense. Other ones are coming because they're sick of the gym and they just want to do something else. And half of them don't even know why they're doing it. So I think it doesn't really matter, like, how people get in there. And that's why I think there's got to be more than one way, because you're casting a wider net to drag people in there who would not ordinarily have chosen that way. So I think, and then eventually you get, even with the worst BJJ schools, eventually they're going to become okay just by the virtue of the fact that they're turning up. See, no one, I'll give you an example. You've probably heard of Jeff Thompson.
Yes, of course. UK. Yeah, in UK. The karate.
So I was talking to Jeff Thompson, talked to him quite a few times. I go over and teach a bunch of seminars every year in the UK. And Jeff and a lot of his friends would come along to some of my early seminars who've done a lot of bouncing and had several thousand fights on the doors, like guys like Bob, guys like, what's his name? Steve Anderson. Is his name, man? Steve Anderson? I keep getting mixed up. Bob Anderson's the American wrestler. Yeah. Steve Anderson.
I'm not familiar with him.
Anyway, the guys have had thousands of fights, literally. Anyway, and Jeff Thompson's all about, now I'm doing him a disservice because you can never distill someone's life's work down into 3 sentences, but it's kind of like this. He puts up a fence, which I'm sure you know with the hands. Fence up, fence. Asks a mind-engaging question to slow his opponent's reactions down, and then hits him with a right hook. Job done. So fence, question, smack him first, right? Now, that is a great strategy, and there's no doubt that is really effective in fights. But this was my point to Jeff on several occasions. Where's all your students? They're not there. And I'll tell you why. Because people can only do that shit for about a week and they're bored senseless, irrespective of how effective it is.
Yeah.
Now, here's the kicker. If they're not turning up because they're bored, it could be argued that Tai Chi is more effective because they are turning up.
Right.
Run.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And also,
you've got to get people on the mat.
Yeah.
Right. If it's so hardcore, effectiveness is meaningless because they're not turning up. So I know I sound like I'm batting for the other team here, and I'm not. I mean, because I think my standards are good. And it takes 10 years to get a black belt and 2 years to get a blue belt, and I'm asking a lot of my students, and I have a core program where they got to put gloves on and they got to square away the self-defense at the start before they get a blue belt. But at the same time, I also get the other side of it. People need to be turning up, so in some ways, hey, if people are turning up, you know what? You're not doing a bad job. So I'm a little bit less hardcore than what I used to be with regard to that whole.
No, but it's funny you should say that, because also, if you're talking self-preservation, the number one killer of people today is heart disease and stroke. Honestly, you're much less likely to die of someone hurting you than you are of heart disease. So, turn up and get some exercise. I completely agree with that. But I also see my responsibility. I have a lot of and I know you did work with the military people. I have a lot of law enforcement people. And New York, frankly, it's not safer than it used to be, but it's not safe. And, a lot of my students have been involved in self-defense altercations, and a lot of them want to go in the cage. So, for me personally, my passion is always to service the people interested in functionality. And what bothers me is when people do things like worm guard, but then say they're doing self-defense. No, like Marcelo Garcia is down the street, and who I love and trained under and have nothing but respect for. And he says on his shirt, sport jujitsu. And he does not make any bones about it. He's like, hey, I'm going to butt scoot. I'm going to play X guard, and I'm going to arm drag you. And that's great. And, doesn't say anywhere MMA or anything like that, and if people enjoy that, fantastic. And Marcelo is a man of integrity and a great guy. And he has never done any sort of false advertising or anything like that. He just does his thing. And I have so much respect for him. But don't think butt scooting is going to help you. And, the problem is I look at Jacare, and Jacare was fighting Yoel Romero, and I talk about this, and he sat up to do the kind of, arm drag thing, and he's in sitting guard, and Jacare looks at him and is like, Yoel Romero looks at Jacare, he's like, really? And he just goes, bonk, and elbows him so hard in the face. And you can see it. And Jacare said after an interview that he had so much trauma from that hit that he couldn't remember what happened in the fight afterwards. And for a week, he was like not clear. So obviously that move is not functional, but for me, you do what you do. And if you're going to do that all the time, then make sure you don't go in an MMA ring, you should not be doing that. And if you want to do something else, more power to you. Like my mom does Tai Chi. I'm not like, Mom, you shouldn't do Tai Chi because, it doesn't work in a cage. No, but, it's silly. Like it helps her lower blood pressure, and she has fun, and she has community, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. And I have another friend who is very much she's half Japanese, and she's very much in the traditional Japanese martial arts world. And it's as a cultural connection to her Japanese side. And that is fantastic. And she wants nothing to do with fighting. She wants to just have this cultural, great, as long as we're being square on our marketing. That's all I'm saying.
It's actually when people, I think one of the factors here is that when people are trying to make their are living out of martial arts and they're starting out. They're desperate. They can't pay the bills. They are desperate, and their wife's yelling at them to get a real job, but they're unqualified to get a real job because they can't fucking do anything else. So that's unfortunately people are trying to monetize their passion because it's their only way out, right? They see that. Now, the problem with that is then their instinct says more students is better. So I'll pretend that no matter what you want, I can give it to you. So they try to be all things to all people. Now, of course, anyone who knows anything about business, I think one of the things is that's not true. You cannot be all things to all people. You've got to identify very, very clearly who you are, and then you market to the people who want to be a part of that. And you'll get more people that way than trying to be all things to everyone. And so that's part of the problem. People trying to be all things to everyone, and they're teaching what they do. Let's say in this instance, it's sport jiu-jitsu, but someone says, I want to go in MMA. They go, yep, you're in the right spot. Someone else comes and says, I want to learn self-defense. They go, yep, you're in the right spot, because they need to pay the bills. Whereas when you don't need to pay the bills, or that's not your focus, which for me it's never been. I don't believe that you monetize your passion. I think your passion monetizes you. But when you're clear on what you want, then it's really easy, because then you're totally honest. This is who I am. I'm staying in my lane. Who out there wants to be part of this? And you'll actually attract them.
Yeah.
That's how it.
Absolutely. And I think what we're talking here is also something is integrity. And I know you quote stoicism all the time, and you had just had a post recently on this, which is, I thought it was a phenomenal post. But we're talking about the concept of integrity. But for me, integrity is not integrity when you're not challenged. It's like when it's not integrity when it's easy, when you say the right thing, when it's easy to say. It's like when it's hard to say the right thing, you're gonna eat hurt. Something is gonna, you're gonna eat it by doing the right thing. That's integrity. And but as martial artists, I my academy is a little bit more Japanesey because of course I lived there for so many years. But the tradition of the Japanese code is important to me, and it starts and ends with courtesy and also integrity. And you got to say, this is it. That's why I always say anybody says I created a record, I correct them right away, because that's called lying. It's not integrity. I'm not going to take credit for something I didn't do. I didn't create it. I just expanded it. And hey, I did these other things too. But, also anytime I teach a technique, I say, I got this technique from this guy, and this is not mine. And actually this is this, and I got this from here. And, because that's just the right way to do it. And because that's the way I think as martial artists we should conduct ourselves. To me, of course, there's a self-defense element in that, but it's a path of self-betterment, and you cannot better yourself when you are false to yourself and false to others. You have to be above board and walk with integrity, and that's just kind of, it's like really important to me. And I have lost a lot of respect for a lot of people because I felt that they did things that besmirched, the path, and like, we talked about it too. Like people do seminars and then there's a little hanky panky thing, and,
My God.
Disgusting.
Don't start.
You know what I'm talking about, though. We're on the same page here.
I know exactly.
Yeah.
So hear more about this story. I think.
Anyway, I'll be quiet because Matt is like,
get the ratings up.
Yeah,
let's hear these seminar stories. Well, hanky panky. I had one question for you. We've heard a lot about your. Well, we actually haven't heard that much about your life story, and I feel like there's probably thousands of stories in the bank.
Yeah,
because You've had an amazing life just from the little we've learned about so far. Who's going to play you in the movie about your life? Is it Russell Crowe? Is he top billing?
Don't be silly. Don't be silly.
You're doing an autobiography right now, currently, right?
Pardon?
Your autobiography. Are you working on that?
No, I've done it.
You've done it.
Yeah, rogue
Three
martial
books.
arts.
Well, there's still more of your life coming. Is there more journals and more entries coming?
There is. There's probably one more. Yeah, because the thing is, we constantly change. I was talking to a couple of black belts this morning, talking about this subject. You can look at something, right, like a move, Rene, like Amor Plata, right, or anything that we learn as human beings. So you can look at someone who's been around a long time and you say, do you know this bit of music, or do you understand this author, or do you know that Amor Plata move? And then you, who have been around for a while, say, yeah, I know who that is. But the person that saw that thing 10 years ago is not the same person that you are right now. You're a different person right now than you were even a year ago. So the person that's right now should have another look at that painting, at that bit of poetry, at that Amor Plata, because you might see it in a different light now. So that's really important in jiu-jitsu, but also in life. We're constantly evolving. So all the thoughts that I had on the various subjects and the lessons that I learned over the last, 60-something years of my life, and I've written those in those books, I've changed my view on – I'm not changed my view, but I've deepened my view and fleshed out my views on a lot of things in the last 5 or 10 years. So, yeah, I would maybe talk about every subject that I would talk about 10 years ago. I talk about it in a different way now. But so would you, and so would anyone who's living a life.
It's funny. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in America, it's sort of like when you have one opinion, particularly in the political realm, when you have one opinion and then like 5 years later you say something, well, I disagree with what I did back then. You're like, oh, you're wishy-washy. You're
flip-flopping.
You're a flip-flopper. No, it just,
right.
I mean, that's life. You should
growing.
grow from that. Of
course.
If you talk to me in 1994 and you ask me, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo the same thing? I'd be like, of course they're the same. Of course they're the same, because I was a Judo guy. I'm like, they're the same, these Gracies. Why are they making – and I'm like – now I'd be like, oh, God, this – So you have to evolve. Martial arts have to evolve, and you have to evolve as a person. If you're not evolving, then there's something wrong with your quest in life and your intellectual, your critical thinking.
Well, your perspective.
Yeah.
Your perspective is, in theory, different every day because you're one day older and one day smarter, and you've had some conversations that you hadn't had prior to last night. So your mind is elastic and it should be changing, and therefore, if your view of something the next day, even if it's just looking at a tree or looking at something, it doesn't matter. It's that view is influenced by your past, and your past has changed in the last 24 hours. So, in theory, when you look at it, your view should change slightly. Might be very imperceptible, but
it should.
Your view's unique every day.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to, just to take a big V in topic, one of the things I want to talk about, and you really inspired me because I was bullied as a kid, and that was actually my segue into martial arts. And it was something where I felt people really robbed me of my self-esteem. It was just not a nice experience. And you had something to say about that, and you created this advice for parents to talk to school administrators and people about that. And I thought it was just spot on. I actually shared it with someone, with a parent, and it was very helpful. So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on was because, and it's very personal for me too, because I am when I hear about kids being bullied, my blood boils.
Trigger. You could trigger.
Yeah, exactly. Disassociation.
You're such a snowflake, Renee.
That's right. Snowflake warning. Snowflake warning.
Anyway, but
sorry to bully you, Renee. I apologize.
I'm just gonna crawl into a corner and cry. Me and my snowflake self. But can I just be quiet again? And John, can you talk about how you approach that issue?
Well, I and you the same. I got into martial arts probably because of that same idea. When I was 13, 14, there was this one bully, and it wasn't one fight. It must have been 20. And the same kid, and eventually I won. I lost the first 19, but then my dad said, double leg takedown, mount, punch him till he stops moving, and it worked. So I kind of guessed that some part of me, needed to overcompensate because my self-esteem was smashed. So I get it. Now, I have to say that I don't teach kids. My wife teaches the kids. So she teaches the kids classes at my school. I only teach the adult classes. So we've had, quite a number of parents, like 4 or 5 in recent memory, that their kid has defended themselves at school using, something that they've learned with us, and the parents have been called in and the kid's been punished. So the latest instance of that, it's happened to my child. My kid was
Felix. That happened to Felix.
It happened. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for knowing his name. I appreciate that. Felix. It happened to my son Felix, who's little for his size, but he's little, but he's ferocious. So he's been bullied by some kids. The kids, everyone knew.
I'm so sorry to hear that. That's terrible.
They pushed kids onto him, but then he just slammed them and he got into trouble. And then I get called into the principal's office. Now, when it's your kid, I don't care because I didn't have to think about it too much because I don't need to argue. Why am I doing it? Your kid can't fight. We have a 0 tolerance for fighting. And I said, well, I also have a 0 tolerance for fighting. We have the same policy. And if someone lays hands on my kid, hey, he's got my permission to headbutt him into tomorrow. What? And they went off at me and they said to him, you've got time off. You got a day off. And I argued for a week off because we need to do more training. So and go to the movies. And we need to go to the movies to see Guardians of the Galaxy. And we've got things to do. So could I just have more time away from this ridiculous playground? So anyway, that was my point. But that's not – you can't be like that. So I didn't think much about it, right, until there was a little girl. There was a girl, she's only 12 years old, 3 guys smashed her against the locker. 3 guys, 12-year-old girl, pushed her against the locker. She pushed him back, stand back. The guys grabbed her again, or one of the guys. She's got a Sotogari, knee ride, armbar.
Oh, wow.
And they're bigger than her. Then the other guy comes in. She goes double leg, mount, slap. Now she's been, and then the third one kind of backed off because he doesn't want to get embarrassed by a girl beating him up. So now, and then that girl's parents were called into the office and they were distraught that she was being punished, right, for her actions. And so they've asked me for help, and that got me going. And I spent a weekend on, formulating my arguments for that situation, meaning, because here's what happens. The school principal is used to having this argument with parents, calling them in, sitting them down and giving them a lecture about how they have a 0 tolerance for fighting, right? A school principal's used to that argument. And out he or she goes and lays out his little arguments. But the parent's not used to doing that argument. The parents are busy going about their lives, and it may never happen to them. So in a way, I don't like that unbalance, Renee, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
The school principal, he knows about this fight. He already got his arguments prepared. He calls up the parent out of the blue and tells them to come into the office. In a way, that's bullying in and of itself. So I started to get a bit.
No, it's funny because it's a self-defense paradigm. It's also like you're walking into their den. Like you have to. Right. If you're unprepared for the criminal's den, you're unprepared, and not just a criminal, but that's the whole setting the stage is what I talk about in self-defense. The criminal wants to set the parameters of their interaction. You cannot let that happen.
Yeah, right. So that was the reason I thought, well, I'm going to give this person, some ammunition, if you like. And so I started to, just formulate my thoughts. I hadn't done it prior to that, but that's part of what I like about writing. I don't really write for any other people. I write to, crystallize my own thinking, right? In writing it down, it just cements the idea in my head. So I did that. And then I thought, well, I may as well keep going and, make some good little cartoony type memes about it, because there are a lot of parents that are called in that don't speak English that well. Maybe English is their second language. So they struggle to see all the arguments and keep them afloat in their head under pressure. So I just made a few little cheat cards that you can see in 5 seconds. Oh, right, that's my argument. And then to arm them with those things. So I've got a few basic arguments. I don't know what it's like in America, but over here they've got this ridiculous thing, and it's called a zero.
Same thing. It's exactly the same.
Tolerance for fighting.
It's ridiculous. It's exactly the same.
So first of all, zero tolerance for fighting, I'm in agreement with their policy. It's just that I have the same policy, and our children should have the same policy. The children should have a zero tolerance for fighting policy. So what the school's not doing is they're not making a very clear distinction that needs to be made. They're saying zero tolerance for fighting, but they cannot say zero tolerance for self-defense. That is against human rights, and in Australia it's against state law. State law, it flies in the face of state law. Every single human has a right to defend themselves. I mean, I'm talking now, philosophically or ethically, but it's actually in the legislation. So it's probably in American legislation as well. So I don't care what the school policy is. My policy of self-defense and my right to defend myself when someone lays hands on overrides your school policy. And that's the basic thrust of what I was trying to say to these parents. It doesn't matter what the school policy is. Your right to defend, your child's right to defend themselves overrides it. And if you took them to court, they would lose. So you're not going to take them to court, but threaten to take them to court. I'm confused about this issue. Let's see what the law says about this. My solicitor says, could you please put that in writing, please? And you watch the principals backpedal then. Because the assault is an emergent event, right? So when a child's assaulted, it's happened just out of the blue. There's no time to call a teacher, because the teachers say, why don't you call the teacher? What? Why don't they call their martial arts coach when they're being assaulted in the Bronx? Because it's an emergent event. It's emergency happening now. There is no time, right? And the bottom line is we all have a legal and intrinsic human right to be able to defend ourselves from physical violence.
Absolutely.
And would the teacher follow his own rule? Imagine that. What if someone breaks into his house at night time, comes up and assaults his wife? What's he going to do? Call the cops? Or is he going to act? So it's just ridiculous, this whole idea of zero tolerance for fighting. No, zero tolerance for bullying, I agree. Zero tolerance for fighting, no, I do not agree with that.
Yeah.
Everyone has a right to defend themselves.
What I liked is how you reframed the argument. It's like, why did you fail to create a safe space for my child? Why did my child have to resort to self-defense? So you failed in your role as a caretaker. So you failed. So now you're putting it on my child? No. You as a caretaker failed, and your legal responsibility is to provide care and safety for my child when I am not there. And if you have not, then hey, that's on you. Right? Yes. I loved how you reframed that.
Well, the schools do have, at least in Australia, they have a duty of care to protect our children from physical assault while on their premises. So that's why why have you neglected to take appropriate action? Why does my son or daughter need to defend themselves? Because this raises certain legal questions, and my solicitor or lawyer has asked me to ask you that question because they need to know why you haven't been able to do that. You've just got to put them back because they're bullies. They sit there going blah, blah, blah. And no, we need to put those things back on them. And so I need you to provide me with a reason why you did not provide it as your duty of care. Why you did not protect my child? And then they'll backpedal. That's the reaction that we've had here. They backpedal.
That is wonderful. And I think if you look at depression, you look at self-esteem issues, you look at all these things. A lot of this traces back to bullying, and unfortunately, bullying is a disease in everywhere. and it's kind of tolerated. And what I really hate is like the, oh, boys will be boys kind of argument. No, it's a pernicious, horrible thing that has lasting effects. I have so many students who still have scars. And, you want to say what keeps me in the martial arts and what keeps us in the arts? A lot of my schools, and I was talking to one of my students today, and, he was racially bullied for a long time because he's not white and he lived in a predominantly white area, racially bullied, taunted, and he has some inner demons to exercise, and he's an adult now, but it's like there's something in you, and you have to it stay when you have these formative years. They say in psychological child development, your formative years are like 2 to 4, and then there's a little edge, and then it's like 5 to 9 or 5 to 11, and then these instances, these things help shape you for the rest of your life. And so if you're scarred at those moments, you carry those scars. And, it's a very personal thing for me. But I also have a lot of students who carry those scars. And, it's just, it's terrible that somehow, the 60s, and I'm a very liberal guy, but the 60s, like, oh, let's say no to war and violence and this and that. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I get that. But at the same time, not all violence is bad. Violence in the service of self-preservation is a human right. And that goes from the moment you're born, and the against, the violence of, organizational violence where, some teacher does something, or in this case in New York, sometimes people in administration or churches, whatever, do something and everybody covers it up. I don't want to go too into that, but like everybody stands now that's organizational violence. You were victimized, and then suddenly this wall of protection from the organization comes. And that is another type of scarring, because you have no release. You're like, somehow you're in the wrong, you were victimized, and now you're not listened to as a person. When I was bullied. I was actually going to a Catholic school, and I was bullied, and oh, it didn't happen. Blah, blah. So I was very lucky. My parents eventually took me out of that school, but it was not a fun experience, which I reflect on even now. It's terrible. So I just want to thank you for that logical and very, very step-by-step approach for parents. And I actually downloaded all those little cue cards that you did, but if we can make it available to anybody on your website or something like that, is that something you have available or something?
I've got it just as a JPEG. You've got it, right?
Yeah. You put it on Facebook, and I downloaded a few of them.
Yeah, the one that says like how to build a cowering and subservient human being. Set a policy in place whereby there's no distinction between physical assault and self-defense. Make it wrong to stand up. Stuff like that.
Yeah. Anyway, that was wonderful. So
see, the simplest thing for people to remember, like if all this is too much, is you've just got to ask the school principal one thing. Are they saying it's against their policy for students to defend themselves? Make them answer that question. Because if they say yes, every lawyer is going to start rubbing their hands together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I guess I really want to thank you for all you shared there. But I want to ask, we kind of like Matt alluded to this. Let's get one juicy story from the life of John Will. One cool story from John Will's years and years of martial arts adventures.
Oh, God. There's lots. I don't know. Name a country. What topic? Name a country topic.
Okay. Challenge match.
Challenge match. Okay, so in let's see, there's a few there. We can pick one. Okay, I'll give you a funny one. This was a funny one. I was doing a little bit of work because there's been martial arts challenging matches way back prior to the UFC, which were funny. Lots of them in LA. People coming in and we're just choking them out and breaking their arms and stuff.
Oh, that was at Higgins or?
Pardon?
Was that at Higgins?
Yes.
Oh,
There was an endless line of them
really?
in. But prior to the UFC, you gotta understand, prior to the UFC, no one knew. So they were just rocking up every Friday night. Like Gene LaBelle would often bring some in, and it'd be funny. But the one I'll tell you about is I was teaching Victoria when I started teaching Victorian a special operations group, state like we call SWAT, like SWAT team. And there was a bunch of guys come in there to do that. There was the team was 24 guys in our state SWAT team. So they're all pretty highly trained and they're all consider themselves to be hardened fighters. And they're all getting changed to do some training. And I walk past the change rooms and I hear one of them say, that little guy, I could beat the snot out of him. I heard this guy. So they come out on the mat. And I go, I need a volunteer. We're going to do cuffing, handcuffing non-compliant people. So I go, you. And I pick this guy. So he goes, what do you want me to do? I go, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to try to stop me from cuffing you. And he says, with what cuffs? And I go, those ones that you've got in your pocket. He goes, what? And I go, yeah, ready? He goes, no. And I double leg, take down, mounted him, slapped him, turned over, back choked him good. He went out, pulled out his cuffs, cuffed him up while he's unconscious, dragged him off the mat and into the corner. So then I left him there for the entirety of the class.
No!
Everyone was laughing. They were all laughing because he must have been that way. So he sat there in the corner. He woke up on his belly down, wondering where he was with his hands cupped behind his back, wiggling like a worm, finally got himself around, sitting on his butt, yelling out, blah, blah, blah. And I ignored him and continued to teach the whole class for an hour on cuffing. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Here's the good part. The next day I come back for another session, right? Because I was teaching them all week. I walk up the stairs into their training area. I walk up and he is there pointing a Sig Sauer 9mm gun at me, which is loaded with FX rounds. For those who don't know what FX rounds is, it's like a normal 9mm round, except that instead of a ball of lead or copper or whatever it is, it's a tiny little ball of Teflon with paint inside. But it's much worse than paintball. Like if you shot someone at 2 meters, they will bleed. So it's pretty hardcore. He unloaded his entire clip at me. 15 shots. Bang, 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 and I'm ducking and running. He hit me half a dozen times. And, man, I had black bruises the size of apricots for weeks after that. He got into a lot of trouble for doing that. You're not supposed to shoot civilians.
I hope so.
So he just ambushed you.
He totally ambushed me. I come up the stairs and he was there going, bang, bang, bang. So he was really pissed off about the previous day.
Oh man. Well, that's still funny.
Can we have you call in once a week and just give us one story?
Yeah. Okay, I know it's late, but we have to. Matt, can we have one more story too? This is awesome. Matt, you're ask him something.
I want to know something that happened off the mat. It's like when you're traveling around. You've been everywhere. I could just throw a dart at a board and probably hit some country. You've been to it.
Off the mat. What about? About what?
You ever got any legal trouble? Like been in trouble with the law in another country? Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Can you not admit to it?
I can admit to. I have the book, Mala Purana, rare book. Put it this way, the Indian State Reference Library no longer has their copy.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for that caveat there. What else? There was I'll tell you something funny. I was just caught speeding in California, right, a long time ago. and I got a ticket, which allegedly I threw away because why would I pay it? I live in another country. But apparently they track you on this shit. And what they do is it goes to warrant. So if they've caught me speeding, the number plate of the car that you're driving, it goes to warrant if you don't pay the fine. And they don't in America. This probably everyone knows over there, but in Australia, this is weird to us. They don't. If it's gone to warrant and there's a warrant for your arrest, there is no distinction made between a murderer and a traffic violation, right? All they know, the police officer knows, is this person's a warrant. So it's like out of the car, lay on the ground, spread your hands, gun pointed at your head. So the car I was driving was David Meyer's car.
Oh, no. David Meyer is also an incredibly famous jiu-jitsu fighter who I've had the pleasure to train with. They're very good friends, too.
For the next several years, 2 or 3 times he was pulled over, made to lay on the ground, spread-eagled, cuffed.
Oh, my God. That's terrible.
Until they worked out that he was David Meyer and not John Will, forcing him to eventually change his number plates.
Oh, are you guys still friends? Or
we're best friends.
Wow.
And David is like the nicest. He's a vegan.
Yes.
He's a nice. He runs this like pet, adopt a pet, save, rescue pet thing. He's the most like the nicest saint in the world you've ever met.
It's Saint David. It's opposite to me, Saint
so
David.
funny.
He's got the punishment. I've yet to be caught.
Okay, that's hilarious.
I'm on the lam.
Oh man! So he changed his plates because of that. That's funny.
He did.
The ticket's still not paid.
No.
California's still looking for you.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
anyway.
but I think it's 25 years old, so I think there might be like a
statute of limitations.
Yeah, where they go, you know what? Just wipe this one out. Maybe.
Don't
maybe
let him
not.
borrow your car, Renee.
I don't have a car.
No, do not.
Here we go.
And besides, they drive on the other side of the road in Australia, right? You guys drive
We do.
opposite of us, right?
Yeah. And the toilets
Yes,
flush the
we
opposite
do.
way, right?
Is that true?
Everything.
No, that's
The
not
toilet
true.
goes down the wrong way, and we drive on the side of the road.
I can't. Actually, I'd always wanted to visit New Zealand and Australia. So, hopefully someday my wife and I can visit, and we can all train together.
Nice,
and
yeah.
and I can drive your car and maybe do something.
Maybe get a speeding ticket. I'm sure they're not so militant here, though. It's a bit weird over there.
Thank you so much for such an awesome podcast, and it's just I'm a super fan of yours. I really am. I don't really realize, but we met once long ago when I was a dumb white belt. You were on the other side of the room with I think it was Bob Bass and a couple other guys. I think it was Bob Bass. It was like the old school guys. And I was like, wow, those are the cool guys over there with Hegan. And I'm just a white belt. And I was like, wow, these guys are so cool. And then, out of the blue, you messaged me, a while ago and said, oh, you the rack guard guy? And I'm like, yeah, I am the rack guard guy. And we had this nice reconnection. And I have so much love for everyone in the Machado organization. And it's just so wonderful to have this conversation with you, and it's truly my honor, truly an honor.
Yeah.
And I know you're
thank
going to be
you
like,
very much. Thanks for having me on. It's been nice.
wonderful. I hope to I'll be listening to you on Saturday night at 9 p.m. You're always live and you have a lot of wisdom to share. And it's Saturday night, 9 p.m. here in New York, but it's
okay.
It's Sunday early morning for you.
At 11 a.m. my time. Yeah. Yes.
So, and you do your Facebook Live, and is anything else? You have all your autobiographies, which is Rogue Martial Artist, was it?
It's rogueblackbelt.com.
Yeah, and they don't sell it on Amazon though. I looked.
No,
Oh,
I sold thousands of them. I mean, I didn't do it to make money. I just did it because I've got some things to say. It started out, I just wanted the 60 I wanted the 20 most important life lessons that I've ever learned, and then what was the situation that I learned that lesson in, and then I put it in chronological order, and it turned out to be 60 things, not 20. So I took 3 books. So that's basically what it is. It's an autobiography, but that's not why I wrote it. I wrote it because it's the 60 most important things I've ever learned.
Well, I'm going to go on that website right now and see if I can get a copy. And I just want to say thank you again. So much fun. And if you ever would like to come on again, I know we'd love to hear some more stories and some more wisdom.
Of course, yeah, no problem. And we'll meet sometime in New York because we've never been there. And my wife wants to come, and she's just walked in, and she heard me say New York, so now she's smiling and jumping up and down.
And I was nice enough to chat with your wonderful wife over when we Skyped, and I was so amazed what a wonderful cook she is. I can't believe it. For the listeners, I know because I followed you, but in a Michelin rated restaurant, she was allowed to go back and cook. And not only that, is she's amazing at jiu-jitsu. I would love Mariko, my wife, and your wife, and all of us to train together someday, because I think it would just be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll go out for dinner. It'll be fun. We'll do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, roger that. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Martial_culture and on Instagram at MartialCultureCast. Please leave a review on iTunes, and we'll see you next time on the Martial Culture Podcast.